Victoria Sterling stepped out of her midnight-shaved Bentley, designer heels clicking against the pristine asphalt of Sterling Luxury Motors. The morning sun caught the diamond on her wrist as she adjusted her Armani blazer. Across the parking lot, a man in a faded work shirt and scuffed boots stood quietly beside a rusted pickup truck, holding what looked like an ancient wrench. He didn't belong here, not in Millbrook's most exclusive automotive district, not anywhere near her world of 47 supposedly unfixable supercars worth $34 million. Victoria's lips curved into that particular smile she reserved for people who clearly didn't understand their place. What she didn't see was the way his calloused fingers traced the worn metal of that old wrench, like a surgeon checking his scalpel before the most important operation of his life. Michael Thompson had been standing in that parking lot for 23 minutes, watching expensive cars drift in and out like ghosts of a life he once knew. His 10-year-old son Tommy sat in the passenger seat, sketching Ferrari engines with the precision of someone twice his age. The boy's drawings were remarkable, every line perfect, every detail accurate, down to the smallest bolt. Michael's hands tightened around the wrench his father had given him 30 years ago, the metal warm from decades of use. 3 years had passed since he'd walked away from everything that mattered in the automotive world. 3 years since his wife Sarah died in that terrible accident, and their lives had crumbled like old paper. Tommy's medical bills sat on the dashboard. $200,000 for the heart surgery that would save his son's life. The same genetic heart condition that had taken Sarah was now threatening their boy. Michael had sold everything he could, borrowed against everything he owned, but it wasn't enough. Never enough. The small garage he ran in town brought in maybe $3,000 a month on good weeks. He fixed pickup trucks and family sedans, stayed away from anything that reminded him of his former life. But 47 broken supercars worth $34 million represented hope. If he could convince this woman to trust him with her impossible problem. Victoria approached with the confident stride of someone who had never been told no. Her heels echoed across the empty morning lot, each step measured and deliberate. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to smell his coffee but far enough to maintain her superiority. Her eyes swept over his appearance, the worn work shirt with Thompson's auto embroidered above the pocket, the jeans that had seen better decades, the boots that told stories of honest work. Nothing about this man suggested he could solve her $250 million problem. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like a lab specimen that had wandered into the wrong experiment. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her voice carrying the particular coldness reserved for people who had clearly made a mistake. Michael looked up from his wrench, meeting her gaze with surprising steadiness. His eyes held something she hadn't expected. Not desperation, not the usual hustle of small-town mechanics looking for a break. There was a quiet confidence there, mixed with something that looked almost like sadness. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she anticipated, with the careful precision of someone who chose his words carefully. "I'm here about the 47 cars," he said simply. "The ones nobody else can fix." Victoria's laugh came quick and sharp, the sound of someone who had heard this pitch too many times before. She gestured toward the gleaming showroom behind her, where the shadows of million-dollar machines waited in climate-controlled silence. Every major automotive expert in the country had examined those cars. Ferrari's own master technicians had thrown up their hands in defeat. McLaren's engineers had called the problems impossible to solve with current technology, and this man in worn boots thought he could succeed where legends had failed. She was about to dismiss him when Tommy appeared at his father's side, clutching a notebook filled with impossibly detailed sketches. The boy's drawings made her pause. These weren't childish doodles, but technical blueprints that would make engineering professors weep with envy. The autumn air in Millbrook carried the scent of old money and older secrets. Victoria Sterling had inherited Sterling Luxury Motors from her father 6 months ago, along with a reputation built over 40 years and debts that could sink the company before Christmas. The 47 cars represented the worst crisis in the company's history, a collection of the world's most expensive automobiles, each one broken in ways that defied conventional repair. Insurance companies were circling like vultures. Investors were asking uncomfortable questions. Her father's legacy hung in the balance, and she was running out of time to prove she deserved to carry the sterling name. She looked at Michael again, seeing something she'd missed the first time. The way he held that old wrench wasn't casual. It was familiar, professional. Michael had learned long ago that first impressions mattered, especially in a world where appearance often outweighed ability. But he'd also learned that sometimes desperation could open doors that credentials couldn't. He pulled a business card from his wallet, simple white cardstock with black lettering that read, "Thompson's Auto Repair, all makes and models." It looked pathetic next to the gold-embossed luxury around them. Victoria took the card anyway, her manicured fingers careful not to actually touch his calloused ones. The address listed was in the old part of town, where blue-collar families had lived for generations, not the kind of place where automotive miracles were born. But Tommy's sketchpad told a different story, one that made her curious enough to consider the impossible. 3 days later, Victoria found herself driving through parts of Millbrook she'd never seen before. The houses grew smaller as she moved away from the estate district, paint peeling from shutters that had weathered decades of New England winters. Thompson's Auto Repair sat at the end of a gravel road, a converted barn with 2 service bays and a small office that had seen better years. The sign out front was hand-painted, the kind of simple craftsmanship that spoke of pride rather than pretension. Michael's pickup truck sat in the driveway next to a small trailer that served as home for him and his son. The contrast to her world couldn't have been starker. This was where people lived paycheck to paycheck, where every dollar mattered and every decision carried weight. Michael emerged from under the hood of an ancient Ford pickup, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen countless similar moments. He didn't seem surprised to see her Bentley in his driveway, though her car was worth more than his property. Tommy waved from the office window, his notebook open to a new page of impossibly detailed engine drawings. The boy had been sketching since dawn, his young mind processing mechanical complexities that would challenge graduate students. Victoria stepped carefully around oil stains and scattered tools, her designer shoes navigating a world she'd never experienced. The air smelled of motor oil and honest work, completely foreign to the sterile perfection of her showroom. Yet something about this place felt more real than anywhere she'd been in years. "You came," Michael said, not quite a question, but not quite a statement either. His voice carried the same quiet confidence she'd noticed before, tinged now with something that might have been hope. Victoria nodded toward the BMW in his bay, a 15-year-old model that had clearly seen better days. The engine was partially disassembled, components arranged with surgical precision across a makeshift workbench. What struck her wasn't the car's age or condition, but the meticulous care with which Michael had approached its repair. Every part was clean, every tool in its proper place. This wasn't the chaotic workspace of an amateur, but the organized domain of someone who understood machinery at a fundamental level. She found herself reconsidering her assumptions about this quiet man and his impossible claims. Tommy bounded out of the office, his notebook clutched against his thin chest. The boy looked smaller than his 10 years, pale in the way children get when illness shadows their childhood. But his eyes blazed with intelligence and enthusiasm, completely focused on the notebook he thrust toward Victoria. The drawings inside made her breath catch. Detailed cross-sections of Ferrari engines, McLaren's suspension systems, Lamborghini transmissions. Each sketch was annotated with technical notes that demonstrated understanding far beyond the boy's years. These weren't copied from magazines or textbooks, but drawn from memory, each line precise and purposeful. Victoria realized that genius sometimes came in unexpected packages, and that this 10-year-old might understand more about supercars than most of her certified technicians. "Dad knows all about these," Tommy said, his voice carrying the absolute faith that children have in their parents. "He used to build cars like these, really fast ones." Michael's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, a shadow crossing his features like clouds over sunlight. He placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, the gesture both protective and warning. There were stories here, Victoria realized. Layers of history that explained how a small-town mechanic could speak about 47 impossible cars with such quiet confidence. She'd done her research, but public records only revealed so much. The important details, the ones that mattered, were hidden in the spaces between words and the careful way Michael avoided talking about his past. The conversation that followed was unlike any Victoria had experienced in the business world. Michael didn't pitch or persuade. He simply listened as she described the 47 cars and their seemingly impossible problems. Electrical systems that failed without cause, engine computers that rejected every attempted solution, transmission issues that defied diagnosis. Each problem had stumped the best minds in the automotive industry, yet Michael nodded along as if these challenges were merely complex puzzles rather than career-ending disasters. His questions were precise, technical, revealing an understanding that went far deeper than his humble garage suggested. By the time the sun set over Millbrook, Victoria found herself making a decision that would have seemed insane 24 hours earlier. The first car arrived on a flatbed truck the following Monday. A Ferrari F8 Tributo, midnight blue with an interior that cost more than most houses. The problem was elegantly simple and devastatingly complex. The engine management system refused to communicate with any diagnostic equipment. Ferrari's own technicians had spent 3 weeks trying every possible solution before declaring the car irreparable. The computer brain that controlled every aspect of the vehicle had effectively died, taking with it the ability to diagnose or fix any other issues. Michael circled the car slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, not touching anything. His eyes traced every line, every curve, seeing something others had missed. After 20 minutes of silent observation, he opened the hood and placed his palm flat against the engine block. What happened next defied explanation. Michael closed his eyes and listened, not with his ears but with his entire being. His fingers traced components with the delicate touch of a blind man reading Braille, feeling vibrations and temperatures that revealed secrets hidden from conventional diagnostics. He worked in complete silence for nearly an hour, his movements precise and purposeful. Tommy sat nearby, sketching every detail of his father's process with the dedication of a documentary filmmaker. Victoria watched from the office window, her business training warring with what she was witnessing. This wasn't mechanical repair as she understood it. This was something closer to art, or perhaps surgery performed on the mechanical heart of a machine that costs $300,000. The engine turned over on the first try. The diagnostic computers, which had been dead for months, suddenly came to life with screens full of data that made perfect sense. Michael stepped back from the car, wiping his hands on that same old rag, and looked up at Victoria with eyes that held both satisfaction and something deeper, something that looked like recognition. He'd seen this exact problem before, solved it in another life when he wore different clothes and worked in a different world. The solution wasn't in any manual or database. It was in understanding how machines breathed, how they thought, how they could be coaxed back to life by someone who truly understood their language. Victoria walked out to the garage on unsteady legs, realizing she'd just witnessed something impossible. News of the first successful repair spread through Millbrook's tight-knit community like wildfire. By Wednesday, 3 more cars had arrived at Thompson's auto repair. A McLaren 720S with a transmission that shifted randomly, a Lamborghini Huracan whose all-wheel drive system had developed what engineers called automotive schizophrenia, a Porsche 911 GT3 RS that produced horsepower readings that varied by the hour. Each problem was unique. Each solution seemed impossible, yet Michael approached them all with the same quiet confidence and methodical precision. He never hurried, never showed frustration, never admitted defeat. Tommy documented everything, his notebook growing thick with observations and technical details that would make engineering textbooks jealous. Victoria found herself spending more time at the garage than at her own office. She told herself it was business necessity. These cars represented her company's survival, but the truth was more complicated. Watching Michael work was like witnessing a master craftsman at the peak of his abilities, solving problems through intuition and experience, rather than brute force and expensive equipment. He charged exactly what he'd quoted for each repair, refusing her offers to pay more, even when the solutions proved far more complex than anticipated. There was an honesty to his approach that felt foreign in her world of corporate politics and calculated moves. He treated every car as if it were the most important machine on Earth, regardless of its owner's status or his own desperate need for the money. The breakthrough came on a rain-soaked Thursday afternoon when car number 17, a Ferrari F40 worth 7 figures, revealed its secrets under Michael's patient hands. The problem had puzzled experts for months. The engine produced perfect power on paper, but felt lifeless on the road, as if something essential was missing from its soul. Michael worked on it for 6 hours straight, Tommy bringing him coffee and sandwiches while Victoria watched from the office. Near sunset, Michael made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and called them both over. His hands were shaking as he pointed to a component deep in the engine bay, something so small and seemingly insignificant that previous technicians had ignored it completely. "This is my design," he said quietly. "I built this engine." The silence that followed was deafening. Rain drummed against the garage roof while Victoria processed the impossible truth that had been hiding in plain sight. Michael Thompson wasn't just a skilled mechanic who understood exotic cars. He was the architect of some of the most advanced automotive technology on the planet. The quiet man in work boots had spent years at Ferrari's headquarters in Maranello, designing the very engines that now sat broken in his humble garage. His name wasn't in the company records because he'd been employed under contract, his innovations credited to the teams he'd led rather than his individual genius. The 47 impossible cars weren't just random mechanical failures. They were his children, crying out for their creator's touch. Tommy's notebook slipped from his hands, pages fluttering in the afternoon breeze. His drawings suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't been copying technical specifications, but remembering stories his father had told him during bedtime. Tales of beautiful machines that could dance with the wind and sing songs of pure speed. Michael's quiet confidence wasn't born from arrogance, but from intimate knowledge of every bolt, every wire, every beating mechanical heart that lay beneath the exotic bodywork. He'd helped birth these machines, nurtured them through development, and watched them go out into the world to bring joy to their owners. Now they'd returned to him broken and abandoned, and he was bringing them back to life, one impossible repair at a time. The revelation changed everything, and nothing. Michael continued working with the same methodical precision, but now Victoria understood what she was witnessing. This wasn't just automotive repair, it was resurrection, performed by someone who knew these machines better than their official creators. The repairs that had seemed impossible now felt inevitable, the natural result of a master craftsman reuniting with his life's work. Word spread through automotive circles that something extraordinary was happening in a small Connecticut town, but Michael refused all interviews and publicity. He had 47 children to heal, a son who needed surgery, and secrets that weighed heavier than the most exotic alloys Ferrari had ever produced. The complications began with car number 28, a McLaren P1 that had been sitting in storage for 8 months. The hybrid system was completely dead, its battery packs corrupted beyond conventional repair. Michael spent 3 days studying the car, occasionally making soft sounds of recognition as he rediscovered systems he'd helped design years earlier. But this repair was different, personal, in a way that made his hands shake when he thought no one was looking. Tommy noticed first, sketching not just the mechanical details but his father's expressions, capturing the pain that flickered across Michael's features whenever he looked at certain components. Victoria sensed the shift too, the way Michael's confident demeanor cracked slightly whenever he worked on hybrid systems. The truth emerged gradually, piece by piece, like a puzzle being assembled by invisible hands. Sarah Thompson had been driving a McLaren P1 when the accident happened. Not any McLaren P1, the prototype that Michael had personally modified. The test vehicle he'd brought home to share with his wife because he was so proud of the breakthrough technology they'd developed. The official report blamed driver error, but Michael had spent 3 years wondering if his modifications had somehow contributed to the crash. Every hybrid system he'd seen since reminded him of that terrible night when ambition and love had collided with tragedy. Now he was face to face with the very technology that haunted his dreams. forced to repair systems that felt like extensions of his own guilt. Victoria found herself becoming more than just a client during those long autumn days. She brought coffee in the mornings, helped organize parts in the afternoons, and stayed late to watch Michael work through problems that had no textbook solutions. She learned that genius often looked like endless patience rather than dramatic inspiration. She discovered that true craftsmanship meant caring more about the work than the recognition it might bring. Most importantly, she began to understand that the quiet man, fixing her impossible cars, was carrying burdens that made her own business pressures seem trivial. Tommy was getting sicker. She could see it in the way he tired more easily, the way his sketches sometimes showed shaking hands that betrayed his growing weakness. The boy's condition became impossible to ignore when he collapsed in the garage during the repair of car number 35. One moment he was sketching a particularly complex transmission design. The next he was on the floor, his lips blue and his breathing shallow. Michael's composure shattered completely as he gathered his son in his arms, all pretense of emotional control abandoned in the face of parental terror. Victoria called 911 while Michael whispered reassurances to Tommy, promising everything would be okay even as his own world threatened to collapse. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but the damage was done. The secret they'd all been avoiding was now impossible to ignore. Tommy needed surgery immediately, and the cost remained as impossible as the cars in the garage. The hospital waiting room became an unexpected confessional. While Tommy underwent tests and evaluation, Michael finally told Victoria the complete truth about his past, his wife's death, and the impossible choice between his son's life and his own emotional survival. The 47 cars weren't just a business opportunity. They were a desperate father's last chance to save the only family he had left. Every repair brought him closer to the $200,000 he needed, but also deeper into memories that threatened to break him completely. Victoria listened without judgment, recognizing courage in forms she'd never learned to value in business school. By the time the doctors emerged with updates on Tommy's condition, she'd made a decision that would change everything. Alessandro Martinez arrived in Millbrook on a gray November morning, driving a rental car that looked absurdly ordinary after months of exotic machinery. He was Ferrari's current chief engineer, a position Michael had turned down years earlier in favor of family time that had ultimately cost him everything. Alessandro had tracked down his former colleague through automotive industry whispers, curious about the man who was solving problems that had stumped entire engineering teams. He found Michael in the garage, elbows deep in the engine bay of a La Ferrari, whose electrical system had been corrupted by a software update gone wrong. The reunion was awkward, two old friends separated by tragedy and time, carrying the weight of different choices and their consequences. The conversation that followed was conducted in fluent Italian, the technical language of their shared past. Alessandro had come seeking answers about the miraculous repairs, but he stayed because he recognized something in Michael's work that went beyond mere technical skill. This was automotive art being performed by someone who understood machinery at a cellular level, who could diagnose problems by touching components and feel solutions in his bones. Alessandro watched Michael work for 3 hours, occasionally asking questions that revealed his own considerable expertise. By afternoon, he understood why the 47 cars had been impossible for everyone else. They required not just skill, but the intimate knowledge that came from being present at their creation. The complications multiplied when Alessandro began sharing stories about Michael's years at Ferrari, speaking with the casual familiarity of someone who had witnessed genius in its natural habitat. Victoria learned about innovations that had revolutionized automotive engineering, breakthrough designs that had been credited to teams rather than individuals, and the quiet man who had walked away from everything at the height of his career. Tommy listened from his hospital bed via video call, his eyes bright with fever and pride as he learned about his father's hidden legacy. But every story Alessandro told also highlighted what Michael had sacrificed, the career that could have been his if grief hadn't driven him into exile from the world he'd helped create. The breaking point came when Alessandro mentioned Sarah's accident, unaware that he was stepping into emotional territory that had been carefully guarded for 3 years. His casual reference to that terrible business with the prototype hit Michael like a physical blow, confirming fears that had haunted him since the night his wife died. The McLaren P1 that killed Sarah had been modified with technology Michael had developed, systems he'd been eager to share with the woman he loved. Alessandro's innocent comment revealed that people in the industry knew about the connection, that Michael's self-imposed exile hadn't been necessary. The guilt he'd carried was real, but the responsibility was shared among dozens of engineers, designers, and executives who had approved the modifications. Victoria watched Michael's world unravel in real time as the truth about his wife's death finally emerged. The prototype car had been equipped with experimental software that was later recalled from all production vehicles, but the recall had come too late for Sarah. Michael had known about the software's potential problems, but had trusted the team's assurances that they were minor. His wife had died because bureaucracy moved slower than tragedy, because engineering compromises had real-world consequences, because love had made him careless with the one person who mattered most. The 47 cars in his garage weren't just mechanical challenges. They were monuments to every decision he'd questioned, every innovation he'd doubted, every moment he'd chosen ambition over caution. The confrontation between Victoria and Michael that evening was quiet but devastating. 3 years of careful emotional control crumbled as Michael finally admitted the real reason he'd taken the repair job. Tommy needed surgery that cost more than Michael could ever earn from his small-town garage. The exotic car repairs were his only chance to save his son, even if each successful fix reminded him of the choices that had killed his wife. Victoria understood then that she'd been watching a man torture himself for money, performing miracles while dying inside. The business transaction that had seemed so straightforward was actually a father's desperate bargain with fate, trading his emotional well-being for his child's survival. The solution came from an unexpected source. Victoria's company carried insurance that covered experimental medical procedures, a benefit that could theoretically be extended to contractors and their families. Tommy's surgery could be covered if Michael officially became a Sterling Luxury Motors employee rather than an independent contractor. The paperwork was complex, the legal arrangements unprecedented, but Victoria's lawyers found ways to make it work. Michael would keep his garage, maintain his independence, but the insurance coverage would ensure Tommy received the best cardiac care available. It wasn't charity. Michael's skills were worth far more than any insurance policy, but it was the kind of creative problem-solving that separated good business leaders from great ones. The final phase of repairs took on a different character once Tommy's surgery was scheduled and guaranteed. Michael approached the remaining 15 cars with renewed energy, his movements lighter despite the emotional weight he still carried. Alessandro stayed to observe, documenting repair techniques that challenged conventional automotive engineering wisdom. Tommy, confined to bed rest before his surgery, sketched constantly, creating technical drawings that captured not just mechanical details, but the artistic soul of machines being reborn. Victoria divided her time between her office and the garage, learning more about cars and craftsmanship in 2 months than she'd absorbed in a lifetime of luxury ownership. Car number 47 was a Ferrari Enzo, a vehicle so rare and valuable that most owners never drove them. This particular example had been sitting in climate-controlled storage for 3 years, its engine completely seized despite low mileage and perfect maintenance records. The problem was mystical rather than mechanical. The car simply refused to run, as if its spirit had departed along with its performance. Michael spent a week studying the vehicle, running his hands along bodywork that had been shaped by designers who understood that automobiles could be sculpture as well as transportation. When he finally opened the hood, he discovered the real issue wasn't mechanical failure, but neglect of a different kind. The car had been stored too carefully, protected from the very elements that kept it alive. The Enzo required a different approach than any previous repair. Michael didn't fix it so much as wake it up, coaxing systems back to life through gentle manipulation and patient observation. He drove it carefully around the block a dozen times, listening to sounds that only he could interpret, feeling vibrations that told stories about the machine's health and happiness. Tommy watched from the garage window, too weak now for extended activity but still sharp enough to document his father's final masterpiece. Victoria realized she was witnessing the end of something extraordinary. Not just the completion of an impossible job, but the healing of a man who had been broken by loss and redeemed by purpose. The last repair was completed on a cold December morning, exactly 63 days after the first car had arrived. Michael closed the hood of the Enzo with the same careful precision he'd brought to every other vehicle, his movements deliberate and respectful. The 47 cars were healed, their impossible problems solved by someone who understood them better than their creators had ever imagined. Alessandro documented the final procedures, already planning papers that would revolutionize automotive repair techniques. Victoria calculated profits and losses, realizing that Michael's work had saved not just her company, but her father's entire legacy. Yet the real victory was smaller and more personal. Tommy's surgery was scheduled for the following week, and the boy's strength was returning with his father's peace of mind. The epilogue unfolded over the following months like a gentle benediction. Tommy's surgery was successful, his young heart repaired by surgeons who treated the procedure as routine despite its complexity and cost. Michael returned to his garage with renewed purpose, taking on projects that challenged him without breaking him. The hybrid systems that had once triggered memories of loss became opportunities to prevent future tragedies through better design and safer implementation. Victoria expanded Sterling Luxury Motors to include a restoration division, with Michael as chief technical consultant and Tommy as the youngest automotive sketch artist in Connecticut. Alessandro published papers about unconventional repair techniques that credited the master mechanic of Millbrook without revealing his identity. The old wrench that had started everything found a place of honor on Michael's workbench, its worn metal polished to a gentle shine. Tommy, now stronger and healthier than he'd been in years, continued sketching automotive dreams with the precision of someone who understood that machines could be art when crafted by hands that truly cared. Victoria learned to appreciate the difference between luxury and craftsmanship, between cost and value, between owning beautiful things and understanding why they mattered. The 47 cars returned to their owners, each one carrying a story of redemption and resurrection that would be told in automotive circles for generations. On quiet evenings, when the garage was closed and Tommy was working on homework that now included advanced mechanical engineering concepts, Michael would sometimes hold his father's wrench and remember the journey that had brought them all together. The tool felt lighter now, its weight no longer burdened by guilt and desperation, but transformed into something that represented hope, healing, and the patient work of making broken things whole again. Outside, Millbrook settled into another New England winter, but inside Thompson's auto repair, the warmth came from more than just the space heaters. It came from the knowledge that sometimes the most impossible problems could be solved by quiet hands, patient hearts, and the courage to believe that redemption was always possible.